long before her name became a curse upon the lips of prophets, before her shadow stretched across the land of Israel, there was Sidon, a city of the sea, radiant and merciless. The sun above Sidon did not merely shine, it blazed, turning the skies into sheets of fire and the fields into seas of violet, where purple-hued blossoms danced in the salt-kissed winds. To the Sidonians, the sea was not simply water, it was the mirror of the gods. They gazed upon its endless expanse and saw not just waves, but eternity itself, a restless testament to powers greater than men. It was here, in this city between sky and sea, that Jezebel was born, the daughter of King Ethbaal. He was no tender father, no gentle shepherd of his people. Ethbaal ruled with an iron hand, feared as much as he was obeyed, a man who bound Sidon and Tyre together through ruthlessness and ambition. To be his child was to be born into fire. From her first breath, Jezebel was set apart. Other princesses were cradled in silken arms, lulled to sleep with songs of beauty and virtue. Jezebel's lullabies were the thunder of waves crashing against Sidon's walls, the chants of priests in Baal's temples, and the unyielding voice of her father declaring judgment upon those who opposed him. She was not fashioned to be a delicate ornament of the court. She was forged to be a weapon. The palace corridors became her school. Jezebel learned not embroidery, but the sharper arts, the weaving of words, the quiet reading of men's ambitions, the unseen currents that flowed beneath every decision of kings and counselors. When most children were taught to bow their heads, Jezebel was taught to lift her eyes, to see above the illusions that blinded lesser minds. She was taught that crowns were not simply inherited. They were seized, shaped, bent to one's will. And so, while the young daughters of nobles practiced the grace of soft words and smiles, Jezebel mastered the harder truths. She learned that men could be moved like pawns, not only by sword or coin, but by whispers planted in secret, by desire carefully stirred, by fear perfectly timed. She learned to make the impossible seem inevitable, and to make inevitability feel like destiny itself. Her instincts grew as sharp as a blade. Her gaze could silence a chamber. Her smile, cold and deliberate, became not a gift, but a weapon. By the time she reached womanhood, Jezebel had already surpassed many seasoned statesmen in the art of persuasion and control. She was a flame, not meant to flicker in the shadows of tradition, but to set kingdoms ablaze. And yet, within her heart, there was no longing for love, as other maidens knew it. Jezebel looked at the path of arranged marriages, of alliances sealed with vows of affection, and she saw weakness. She saw the chains of tradition that sought to bind her future to the whims of men. She vowed she would not be another jewel on a king's crown, nor a voice silenced in a husband's shadow. If marriage came, it would be by her own hand, on her own terms, and for her own ambition. She would use it as a stepping stone, never as a cage. For in Jezebel's heart, a fire burned brighter than any thought of romance, the fire of dominion. She longed not merely to stand beside a king, but to rule through him, to turn his throne into her pulpit, and his kingdom into her canvas. As she stood on Sidon's shores, gazing upon the endless sea, whispers began to reach her ears. Stories of a kingdom fractured, a land not far to the south. Israel, its name, carried the weight of ancient promises, yet its throne trembled under the weakness of its king. Ahab, son of Omri, wore the crown, but his heart lacked the fire of greatness. His reign was marred by division, his people wavering between faith and idolatry, their land scarred by unrest. To others, Israel was a distant, troubled neighbor. But to Jezebel, it was something far greater. It was an opportunity. In the stillness of the night, as Sidon's priests lit fires to Baal upon high places, Jezebel's mind was already moving beyond her father's dominion. She saw the sea not as a barrier, but as a bridge. Beyond those waters lay a kingdom ripe for her hand, a throne weakened and waiting, a king who might think he sought an ally, but who in truth would become her instrument. It was not love that stirred in her heart at the mention of Israel. It was hunger. Hunger for power. Hunger for influence. Hunger for a destiny larger than the shores of Sidon could ever contain. The prophets of Yahweh, far to the south, could not yet see the storm rising. The priests of Baal did not yet know how far their goddess-born child would carry their worship. The people of Israel still clung to their sacred traditions, unaware that a foreign queen's footsteps would soon echo through their streets. But Jezebel knew. She knew her life was not to be measured by the walls of her father's palace. Her life was meant to carve a scar across history, to bend nations to her will. The sea, endless and unyielding, seemed to bow before her as if even the gods themselves whispered of her coming reign. This was Jezebel, born of Sidon, daughter of Baal, not a flower of the court, but a storm gathering strength. And soon, that storm would cross the waters, destined to change Israel forever. The years in Sidon shaped Jezebel into more than a daughter of kings. They forged her into a presence that could not be ignored. While the maidens of her age were taught to dance softly across marble floors and to speak in the gentle tones of obedience, Jezebel was being molded into something altogether different. Her father's court was no place for innocence. It was a crucible where power clashed against power, and Jezebel thrived in its heat. From the earliest days, she was drawn not to the embroidery frames or the idle chatter of princesses, but to the weight of decisions spoken in the council chambers. She listened as advisors debated war and trade, their voices rising and falling like the tides. Where others heard only noise, Jezebel discerned the silent currents beneath the surface, the fears that guided choices, the hungers that betrayed loyalty, the pride that could be turned into ruin. It was said that King Baal raised her as a son would be raised, and perhaps this was true. He did not soften his words around her, nor did he veil the brutal realities of rule. He taught her that thrones were carved from the bones of enemies, and that mercy was often the weakness by which a kingdom fell. Jezebel absorbed these lessons like a sponge soaks the sea. She was not a child to cower. She was a child who learned. By the time she was a young woman, Jezebel could hold her own in the presence of men twice her age. Her voice was confident, her arguments sharp, her ability to sway decisions uncanny. Courtiers who first dismissed her as a girl found themselves unnerved under her gaze, ensnared by her words before they even realized she had spoken. They left her presence convinced that her will had been their own idea all along. She learned the subtle art of manipulation, not merely bending men to her desires, but making them believe it was their desire to obey. She discovered that a well-placed pause could shake a man's confidence more than an army, and that silence could wound as deeply as a sword. Jezebel did not simply play the game of power, she rewrote its rules. And yet, even in her brilliance, she was restless. Sidon's marble halls and golden temples were too small for her vision. She had mastered the court, but her heart longed for more. It was not enough to be a princess within Sidon's borders. She hungered to shape nations, to wield influence beyond the horizon. Whispers of Israel drifted to her like smoke carried on the wind. Israel, a land of promise, a kingdom tied to ancient covenants, yet splintered by division. Their king, Ahab, had inherited power, but not the strength to wield it. His throne was fragile, his people uncertain, their worship divided between Yahweh, the God of their fathers, and the gods of foreign lands. Jezebel listened with a predator's patience. She saw not a fractured kingdom, but an open door. She began to imagine the possibilities. Israel was a land caught between loyalty to their God and longing for prosperity. Ahab, desperate for strength, would be vulnerable. He sought an ally, a queen who could steady his hand and fortify his throne. To most women, Ahab would have seemed a chance for a crown. To Jezebel, he was something more. He was a tool, a vessel, through which her ambition could pour into an entire nation. This thought consumed her nights. She walked Sidon's terraces, gazing toward the south where Israel lay, and in the salt air she felt the pull of destiny. Could it be that the gods had chosen her not to remain bound to her father's house, but to cross the waters and reshape another kingdom in her image? Jezebel's mind sharpened on this thought. If Ahab came with marriage, she would not resist. She would embrace it, not for love, never for love, but for dominion. She would make herself the very fire in Ahab's heart, guiding his every choice. He would wear the crown, but she would wield the power. The priest of Baal in Sidon encouraged her ambitions. They saw in Jezebel not merely a princess, but a high priestess of influence, one who could carry their gods into foreign lands. Their chants grew louder as her resolve hardened. Jezebel began to see herself as chosen, as one destined to stretch Sidon's power across the seas. Still, she kept her composure. She did not rush. She knew power was best seized in silence, like a tide creeping upon the shore. She waited, confident, her heart a storm contained within a calm exterior. And when the news came that Ahab indeed sought alliance through marriage, Jezebel did not hesitate. She had already decided. She would leave Sidon. She would step into Israel's palace, not as a guest, not as a bride, but as a queen whose will would bend the destiny of a nation. As she prepared for this new chapter, Jezebel did not see herself leaving home. She saw herself expanding her dominion. Sidon had been her training ground. Israel would be her stage. And so, the storm gathered strength. The young princess of Sidon, daughter of Ethbaal, would soon leave her birthplace behind. The waves of the great sea would carry her south, not merely across waters, but into history itself. And Israel, unknowing and unready, awaited the queen whose name would echo for generations in fear and defiance. The day came when the whispers of destiny became the reality of Jezebel's life. Word reached Sidon's palace. Ahab, king of Israel, sought an alliance. His kingdom was fractured, his throne unstable, his reign in need of fortification. And how did kings fortify their reigns in those days? With blood, with marriage, with unions that bound nations together. To Jezebel, this was no surprise, it was fulfillment. She had long envisioned such a moment, long weighed the possibilities in her mind. She did not hesitate when the proposal was brought before her. Where another woman might have asked of Ahab's appearance, his demeanor, his kindness, Jezebel asked only of his weakness. Was he pliable? Was he hungry for power? Would he give her the space she needed to rule through him? When she received her answer, she accepted. This was no marriage born of love. It was strategy. Jezebel would leave her father's land not to be conquered by Israel's traditions, but to conquer them herself. She would not be swallowed by another kingdom. She would swallow it whole. The departure from Sidon was marked with grandeur. Her ship, adorned with purple sails, cut through the waves like a blade through silk. The sea, vast and unending, stretched before her as if even the gods themselves cleared her path. The priests of Baal offered sacrifices upon the shore, their voices rising in chants, calling on their god to bless her journey. Jezebel stood tall upon the deck, her hair whipping in the wind, her eyes fixed southward. She was not a bride crossing waters. She was a conqueror, carried on the tide of destiny. As Sidon's coastline faded into the horizon, Jezebel did not weep. Her heart was steel, her spirit unyielding. Home was not behind her. Home was wherever she chose to rule. Her homeland had shaped her, but Israel would be the canvas upon which her power would be painted. The voyage itself seemed touched by omen. The seas, which so often roared in fury, lay calm as if bowing before her. The sailors whispered that Baal had granted her favor, that the gods themselves bore witness to the union soon to take place. Jezebel accepted this in silence, though within her she believed something deeper. This was no favor of Baal, this was destiny bowing to her will. When at last the hills of Israel rose in the distance, she studied them with an unflinching gaze. This was the land her life would reshape. Its stones were foreign, its language strange, its people devoted to a god she neither feared nor revered. But Jezebel had never been moved by strangeness. She did not see obstacles. She saw opportunities. Her arrival was greeted with awe. The people of Israel had heard of Sidon's princess, the daughter of a king, and now she stood before them, regal and untouchable. She carried herself with an elegance that seemed almost divine, a presence that silenced the crowds. Her beauty was undeniable, yet it was her bearing that commanded reverence. She was not soft or meek. She radiated power. In the palace of Samaria, Ahab awaited her. He was not a weak man in body, but in spirit his weakness was plain. Jezebel recognized it instantly. His smile sought to impress her, his words sought to charm her, but she read him like an open scroll. She saw the desperation beneath his gestures, the hunger for validation, the longing for strength he could not summon on his own. To Jezebel, he was not a husband, but a vessel, a king whose crown would soon serve as the pedestal for her ambition. The wedding was celebrated with pomp, sacrifices offered, wine poured, and songs raised in joy. But Jezebel's heart remained cold. She did not marry Ahab. She married Israel. She did not bind herself to a man. She bound herself to a kingdom. With each vow, each ritual, each symbol of union, she felt her grasp tightening around the destiny of a people who did not yet realize what force had entered their gates. Israel was no Sidon. Its people were different, its customs unfamiliar, its God unyielding. They were a nation who spoke of Yahweh, the one who had led them from Egypt, the one who thundered on Sinai, the one whose prophets spoke with fire in their words. Jezebel knew of him, of course, but she did not tremble. To her, Yahweh was just another god among gods, one more to be overcome, one more throne to topple. She believed that in time, even Yahweh's worshippers would bow before Baal or be silenced forever. Within the palace, Jezebel wasted no time. From the moment she set foot in Israel, she carried herself not as a foreigner adapting to a new land, but as a queen already reigning over it. Servants trembled under her glance. Counselors shifted uneasily under her questions, and Ahab himself leaned ever more upon her counsel. She became not just his companion, but his guide, his voice, his strength. The people looked to their king, but in truth, it was Jezebel's hand that steered the throne. The marriage alliance had been sealed with celebration, but beneath its golden surface, a storm was gathering. The union of Jezebel and Ahab was not the joining of two hearts. It was the collision of two worlds, one bound to Yahweh, the God of Israel, and the other devoted to Baal, the god of Sidon. And in this collision, Jezebel's will burned brightest, for Jezebel had not come to Israel to follow. She had come to lead, not to adapt, but to conquer. Not to serve a foreign god, but to enthrone her own. Israel, unknowing, had opened its gates to a queen who would not be content with titles, but who would reach for the very soul of the nation. The palace of Samaria had long been a place of uncertainty. Kings before Ahab had struggled to unite their people, for Israel was a kingdom, fractured tribes divided, loyalties splintered, and worship wavering between the God of their fathers and the enticing idols of foreign lands. Into this fragile house Jezebel entered, and like a flame touching dry straw, she began to consume it. From the first days of her reign, Jezebel proved herself no ordinary queen. She did not wait for courtiers to accept her presence, nor did she seek the approval of Israel's elders. Instead, she moved decisively. One by one, the old voices in Ahab's court were replaced by men loyal to her will. Whisperers who once counseled the king in the ways of Yahweh found themselves silenced, while priests and officials from Sidon quietly filled their place. Those who dared oppose her were removed, not with open war, but with quiet ruthlessness, their influence snuffed out like candles in the wind. Ahab himself, though king by name, yielded to her without struggle. His heart, already weak, leaned heavily on the queen who seemed to carry endless confidence. He found comfort in her decisiveness, in the strength she displayed, in the vision she whispered into his ears at night. Jezebel became not only his wife, but his voice, his strength, and in truth, his ruler. But Jezebel's ambition reached beyond the throne room. She did not come merely to control men. She came to reshape the very soul of Israel. Her first act of true power was religious, not political. She introduced the worship of Baal, the storm god of her homeland, the god she believed had granted her power across the seas. To Jezebel, Yahweh was no more sacred than the countless deities worshipped in the lands surrounding Israel. He was an obstacle to be dismantled, not a power to be feared. Altars began to rise. At first small, tucked away in hidden corners, then grander, planted in the very heart of Israel's cities. Temples were erected with Sidonian stone, towering structures where the smoke of sacrifices rose skyward, blotting out the prayers of Yahweh's faithful. Statues of Baal stood tall in the sun, casting long shadows across the land, while the sound of foreign hymns replaced the songs of Israel's psalms. Jezebel encouraged the people to abandon the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, promising prosperity if they embraced Baal. The priests of Yahweh were driven into hiding, hunted like prey in their own homeland. Many were slaughtered, their blood soaking the earth that once knew only covenant. The prophets, once voices of fire, now lived in caves, sustained only by those brave enough to defy Jezebel's wrath. In the palace halls, Jezebel's presence was absolute. Her beauty was undeniable, but it was not beauty that defined her reign. It was her ruthlessness. She smiled with lips that carried iron resolve. She walked with steps that echoed authority. Even the bravest of men felt unease beneath her gaze, for behind her eyes was not tenderness, but calculation. And yet, the people of Israel could not entirely resist her. She was a queen of majesty, draped in garments of Sidonian purple, carrying herself with the confidence of one who believed the gods themselves favored her. Many bowed, not from love, but from fear, and fear is often more powerful than devotion. Ahab, though king, was now little more than her shadow. His decrees were hers, his judgments shaped by her words. Jezebel had not merely married into Israel. She had enthroned herself upon its very destiny. She had made the throne of David into her tool, the covenant of Yahweh, into her mockery. But beneath the splendor of her power, a deeper battle stirred. For Jezebel had not only offended men, she had challenged the God of Israel. Her defiance was not hidden, not quiet. It was open rebellion. She did not tremble before Yahweh's prophets. She dared to believe that her gods, her altars, her ambition could dethrone the one who had split the Red Sea and thundered from Sinai. The land of Israel darkened under her reign. Faith faltered, fear spread, and idolatry rooted itself deep into the soil. Children grew up learning Baal's name. Families whispered prayers to false gods. And the covenant that once bound Israel to their deliverer seemed to fade into the shadows. Still, Jezebel pressed forward. She was relentless. To her, this was not cruelty. It was destiny. She believed she was reshaping Israel into greatness, uniting it under the power of her gods, molding it into a kingdom stronger than any before. But destiny is never shaped by human hands alone. For even as Jezebel strengthened her grip on Israel, whispers began to rise. Whispers of resistance. Whispers of a prophet who would not bow. Whispers of a man named Elijah, whose voice thundered with the authority of Yahweh himself. Jezebel had seized Israel's throne. She had silenced its priests, raised altars to her gods, and ruled through the weakness of her husband. But the heavens do not remain silent forever. The God she mocked was stirring, and soon her reign of dominance would meet a fire no water could quench. The reign of Jezebel was like a storm sweeping through Israel. Altars of Baal towered over the land, the prophets of Yahweh had been silenced or slain, and the people bowed their heads in fear. Yet in the midst of this darkness, one voice still thundered with defiance, the voice of Elijah, prophet of the Lord. Elijah was no ordinary man. He was not clothed in royal garments, nor did he dine in palace halls. He was a man of the wilderness, rough, uncompromising, his words carrying the fire of heaven itself. Where Jezebel ruled with manipulation, Elijah stood with raw conviction. He feared neither throne nor sword. His presence in Israel was not just a nuisance to Jezebel, it was a threat to her very existence. Elijah appeared suddenly, boldly, as though summoned by the very breath of God. He strode into the palace courts and declared before Ahab and Jezebel a word that shook the land. As the Lord, the God of Israel lives, there shall be neither dew nor rain these years, except at my word. In a land dependent on rain for life, this was not merely a prophecy. It was a sentence of death upon Jezebel's gods, for Baal was worshipped as the god of storms and fertility. If the skies closed, if the rain ceased, then Baal's power would be proven a lie. True to Elijah's word, the heavens sealed shut. The rain stopped. The earth cracked beneath the scorching sun, and famine spread through Israel like a plague. The people cried out for relief, but no sacrifice to Baal brought rain. No chant from Jezebel's priests stirred the clouds. Silence reigned over the skies, and in that silence, the name of Yahweh lingered. Jezebel raged, but Elijah could not be caught. The Lord hid him, sustaining him by ravens in the wilderness, by the kindness of a widow, by the miraculous provision of oil and flour that did not run dry. While Israel starved, Elijah stood unbroken, a living testimony that Yahweh was still God. At last, after years of drought, Elijah emerged once more. He summoned Ahab and the people of Israel to Mount Carmel, the high place where gods were tested, and he declared a contest that would decide the fate of the nation. There, before the gathered multitudes, Elijah spoke words that pierced their divided hearts. How long will you waver between two opinions? If Yahweh is God, follow him. But if Baal, follow him. The challenge was simple. 2 altars would be built, one for Baal, one for Yahweh. Upon each altar a bull would be laid. The prophets of Baal, 450 in number, would call upon their God, and Elijah upon his. The God who answered with fire would be the true God of Israel. From dawn until noon, the prophets of Baal cried out. They shouted, they danced, they cut themselves with blades until blood flowed, their bodies writhing in frenzy. Yet the heavens remained silent. Elijah mocked them with biting words. Shout louder. Perhaps your God is asleep or busy or traveling. The prophets grew more desperate, their cries echoing off the mountain, but no fire fell. Baal was silent. Then Elijah stepped forward. He repaired the broken altar of Yahweh with 12 stones, one for each tribe of Israel. He laid the sacrifice upon it, and to make the act impossible by human means, he drenched the wood and offering with water until it filled the trenches around the altar. Then, lifting his voice to the sky, Elijah prayed with simple faith, "Answer me, O Lord, answer me, so these people will know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again." In that instant, fire fell from heaven. It consumed the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, even the water in the trench. The mountain blazed with the undeniable power of Yahweh, and the people of Israel fell on their faces, crying, "The Lord, He is God! The Lord, He is God!" The prophets of Baal, humiliated and exposed, were seized. Elijah commanded that they be executed by the brook of Kishon, their blood flowing as a sign that Baal's deception had ended. The skies, silent for years, broke open with clouds, and rain poured upon the land once more. The famine ended, and the people knew Yahweh had triumphed. But Jezebel was not moved to repentance. When word reached her of Elijah's victory and the slaughter of her prophets, her heart hardened with fury. She sent a messenger to Elijah with a chilling oath, "So may the gods do to me, and more also, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them." Her rage was boundless, her pride unbroken. She could not allow herself to be humbled, not even by fire from heaven. Elijah, weary from the contest, fled into the wilderness. Though he had stood fearless on Mount Carmel, the weight of Jezebel's wrath pressed upon him. Alone beneath the broom tree, he cried out for death, confessing his despair. Yet even there, Yahweh met him not in thunder, not in fire, but in a gentle whisper. Angels brought him food and water, strengthening him for the journey ahead. Jezebel, however, doubled her grip upon Israel. The contest had proven Yahweh's supremacy, but her pride blinded her. Rather than bow, she sought vengeance. She could not bear the thought of being defied, of her gods exposed, of her power questioned. She ruled not by repentance, but by iron, her cruelty growing sharper, her wrath more deadly. Thus, the land of Israel stood at a crossroads. On one side, the voice of Yahweh, proven by fire. On the other, the iron will of Jezebel, unyielding and relentless. The prophet and the queen, two forces locked in conflict, their struggle echoing through the very soul of the nation. The fire that fell on Mount Carmel should have been the end of Jezebel's defiance. It should have broken her pride and silenced her ambition. Yet Jezebel was not a woman to bend. Where others saw the hand of Yahweh, Jezebel saw only an enemy to be destroyed. Her heart, hardened like stone, refused to bow. Israel groaned under her reign. Though the heavens had declared Yahweh's supremacy, Jezebel pressed forward with greater zeal, determined to choke out the last embers of faith that smoldered in the land. The altars to Baal remained. The temples still echoed with chants to false gods. And the prophets of Yahweh, those who survived, were hunted like fugitives, driven into caves, sustained only by the faith of a few who dared to resist. Blood flowed in Israel as Jezebel's wrath spread. She silenced dissent, not only with words, but with execution. Men who opposed her vanished in the night. Families whispered her name with trembling lips, knowing a single complaint could bring ruin. She ruled not with the tender hand of a queen, but with the iron grip of a tyrant. And yet, Jezebel's power was not merely political, it was spiritual, striking at the heart of Israel's covenant with God. For she had not come to simply reign beside Ahab, she had come to reshape the nation itself. Each altar to Baal was a declaration that Yahweh's covenant no longer bound Israel. Each priest of Baal she installed was a dagger thrust into the heart of the faith that had carried Israel from Egypt. Ahab, weak and malleable, was content to yield. He followed her lead, indulging in her ambitions, allowing her will to guide his throne. In Jezebel, he found not just a wife, but the fire he lacked. In Ahab, Jezebel found not a partner, but a puppet. Together they ruled. But in truth, it was Jezebel's shadow that stretched across the land. Her cruelty was not without limits. The vineyard of Naboth became a story told in hushed voices, a tale of her ruthless ambition. Ahab desired Naboth's vineyard, but the man refused to sell what had been his family's inheritance. Ahab sulked, powerless, until Jezebel stepped in. With forged letters and false witnesses, she orchestrated Naboth's death, and the vineyard was seized. To Jezebel, it was a small matter, another obstacle swept aside. But to Yahweh, it was a crime that cried out for justice. And justice was coming. For even as Jezebel's hand tightened around Israel, whispers of prophecy began to stir. Elijah, though often hidden, still spoke with the authority of God. He declared judgment upon Ahab and Jezebel, proclaiming that their dynasty would fall, that their blood would stain the earth, that dogs would devour Jezebel's flesh by the wall of Jezreel. His words were like thunder in the distance, unseen, yet certain, rolling closer with each passing year. Time passed, but Jezebel's heart remained unrepentant. Even when Ahab humbled himself for a time, tearing his clothes and fasting after hearing Elijah's words, Jezebel did not flinch. Her pride would not allow it. She believed herself untouchable, shielded by her gods, secured by her throne, untamed by the warnings of prophets. But God is not mocked. What a woman sows, she will also reap. The years wore on, and the name of Jehu began to rise. At first he was only a commander, a soldier, in Ahab's service. But the Lord had marked him for destiny. Through the prophet Elisha, God declared that Jehu would be the instrument of judgment upon the house of Ahab. The blood Jezebel had spilled, the idols she had raised, the covenant she had mocked, all would be answered through Jehu's sword. Jezebel, however, paid little attention to such whispers. She had silenced prophets before. She would silence them again. She ruled with the same fire, unbroken, unyielding, convinced that her dominion would never end. Her shadow stretched long across Israel, darkening its faith, searing its conscience. But shadows grow longest, not at dawn, but at the end of the day. Jezebel's reign was approaching its twilight. The storm she had unleashed, the blood she had shed, the idols she had enthroned, all of them gathered weight, pressing toward an inevitable reckoning. The dogs that prowled outside the walls of Jezreel did not yet know it, but their hunger would soon be fed. The stones of Samaria did not yet echo with her fall, but they would soon remember. The prophecy spoken in whispers would thunder in fulfillment. Jezebel had carved her power with fire and blood. Yet every empire built on rebellion against God eventually collapses. The longer her shadow grew, the nearer her night approached. The days of Jezebel's dominance could not last forever. Her shadow had stretched long across Israel, but even the longest shadow fades when the sun sets. The words of Elijah, once dismissed as the ravings of a wild prophet, echoed through time, hanging heavy in the air like a prophecy carved into stone. The dogs will eat Jezebel by the wall of Jezreel. Ahab, her husband and puppet king, eventually fell, his blood licked up by dogs in fulfillment of the prophet's warning. Yet Jezebel remained, undaunted. Her pride was her armor, her ambition, her crown. With Ahab gone, she leaned on her sons to continue the dynasty. She believed her power eternal, her throne untouchable. But the Lord had already appointed his instrument of judgment, Jehu. Jehu had been a soldier, hardened in battle, loyal once to the house of Ahab. But the hand of God marked him for something greater. Through Elisha the prophet, Jehu was anointed as king, tasked not only with seizing the throne, but with bringing an end to Jezebel's reign of terror. His rise was swift, his mission clear: purge Israel of Baal, tear down the idols, and destroy the house of Ahab. News of Jehu's approach spread like wildfire. Armies fell before him, city gates opened in surrender, and the once mighty dynasty of Ahab crumbled. The people, weary of Jezebel's tyranny, rallied to the man sent by God. Jezebel, however, remained defiant. She had lived her life scorning the warnings of prophets, and she would not tremble now. When Jehu rode into Jezreel, Jezebel did not flee. She did not hide in fear. Instead, she adorned herself in royal garments, painted her face, and stood tall at the window of her palace. Her beauty, once the weapon by which she had ensnared kings, now became her final mask. She looked down upon Jehu not as a condemned queen, but as though she still ruled, as though she still commanded the fate of men. With cold, cutting words, she taunted him. "Is it peace, Zimri, murderer of your master?" Her voice was sharp, her defiance burning even in the face of death. To the very end, Jezebel would not yield. She would meet judgment as she had lived, unbroken, unrepentant, unbowed. But Jehu was not swayed by her beauty, nor shaken by her words. He looked up and called to her servants, the eunuchs who stood trembling in her chamber. "Who is on my side? Who?" At once, faces turned. The eunuchs, long chained by fear of Jezebel's wrath, now found courage in the presence of Jehu. They stepped forward, seized their queen, and at Jehu's command, cast her from the window. Her fall was swift. The body of the once mighty queen struck the earth with a thud, her blood splattering against the palace wall and the hooves of Jehu's horses. The one who had trampled prophets, who had silenced voices of faith, was herself trampled beneath the hooves of judgment. Later, when Jehu commanded her burial, for after all she was a king's daughter, the servants went to gather her remains, but there was almost nothing left to bury. The dogs of Jezreel had done their work. They found only her skull, her feet, and the palms of her hands. All else had been devoured, just as Elijah had prophesied. The queen, who believed herself untouchable, had been reduced to bones, her flesh consumed, her legacy stained with shame. Thus ended the reign of Jezebel. Her name, once spoken with fear and awe, became a byword for defiance against God, a symbol of ruthless pride and unrepentant wickedness. Her downfall was not only the end of a dynasty, but a lesson etched into history that no one, not even the most powerful queen, can escape the judgment of the Lord. Jehu, fulfilling his commission, tore down the altars of Baal, slaughtered its priests, and cleansed Israel of Jezebel's abominations. The land that had groaned under her tyranny now breathed again, scarred but free. The idols crumbled, the false prophets silenced, and the people slowly turned their hearts back toward the God of their fathers. And yet, Jezebel's legacy lingered. Her story was passed down as a warning, a dark mirror, reflecting the cost of unchecked ambition, of power wielded without reverence, of a heart hardened against God. She had sought to enthrone her will above heaven, to silence the covenant of Israel, to raise idols in the place of the living God. In the end, she was cast down, consumed, remembered, not for her glory, but for her downfall. Jezebel's life was a storm, brilliant, fierce, and destructive, but storms pass, and when they pass, the world they leave behind bears the scars of their fury. Israel bore those scars. Yet through them, the people learned once more that the Lord alone is God, and that no throne, no queen, no king can stand against his will. So the story of Jezebel ends not in triumph, but in ruin, not in glory, but in shame. Her name lives on, not as a song of victory, but as a warning echoing through the ages. A warning to kings and queens, to rulers and nations, to hearts tempted by pride and rebellion. All who defy the Lord will, in time, meet the same end.